Bombshell tonight in the investigation of the death of a young man, Nolan Wells. Death threats are flying. One actually says there's going to be blood, so much blood. Another death threat says, don't go outside. How can anybody do their jobs when they're getting death threats? Not only that, we understand this case is headed to a grand jury. We also learned tonight that the state's autopsy is complete, but is being kept secret. Isn't an autopsy a public document? Why is it being kept hidden from us, the public? What is in that autopsy, the first autopsy of Nolan Wells? Good evening. I'm Nancy Grace. This is Crime Stories. I want to thank you for being with us.
If you watch this entire breakdown and still walk away without committing to see this through, ask yourself what that says about how much you really care about justice. The call that the friends made when they were returning without Nolan, they say he wanted to stay and be with a girl he just met. She says, no, he left with his friends. I got a problem right there. That's a conflict in the testimony. But when you listen to the call the other friends made, they called Ceto and said they were sinking. In that newly released sound, you can make out somebody saying, wake the F up. What does that mean? I'm not resting till I find out if that's real. Has it been doctored? And if it is real, who are they talking to? Those aren't rhetorical questions. They're questions that demand answers. And the only way we get answers is if enough people refuse to let this case fade from public view. You're part of this now. You're the jury. You're the witness. And the question you have to ask yourself is this. If two people who were with Nolan that day can't agree on what happened, one saying he stayed, the other saying he left, what does that tell you about the truth? The world looked away from cases like this for too long. Don't look away now. Every person who subscribes is a witness, and witnesses are what the dead deserve. Stories with Nancy Grace. You know, Nancy, attorney Ben Crump there has a point. You mean no one saw anything? Where do you see this investigation where things stand? I got a lot of problems with the investigation so far. But remember, we are seeing through a mirror darkly. We don't know all the evidence. There's been one state's autopsy and that has not been released. The family sent the body of Nolan Wells for a second independent autopsy. And that autopsy says undetermined. This is what I do know. I know on the back of his head, the occipital bone back here, there is deep red subcutaneous tissue. It's not anywhere else. It is not pooling of the blood. Once he's died, the blood pools at the lowest point. It's not that because it's only there. I'm curious. Does that suggest a blow to the head? There are many accidental possibilities. When you look at the video out there are tons of boats. They're close together. Did he drink and drown in between one of those boats and nobody noticed? I don't know that. However, that deep reddening on the occipital bone is very disturbing to me. Also, you think, oh, he drowned. But we don't have the lungs. When the second autopsy got the body, the lungs and the throat were missing. Now, I understand why they took the lungs to determine if he had drowned, but why was the neck missing? What about the interior of the throat sparked the initial medical examiner's concern? Was there some bruising on the neck? I don't know. So right now, it could go in so many different directions. Think about what it means to have watched this far. You've heard the evidence. You know what's at stake. If you walk away now without subscribing, you're not just leaving this video. You're leaving Nolan's story to fade back into the silence it came from. That's not what you came here to do. Subscribe. Be the reason his name doesn't disappear again. So many questions that you raise, Nancy, and as someone who's investigating these things, you know which questions to ask. I want to take you back, though, because that marking on the back of his head is not insignificant, as you rightfully point out, because also the size of it. It's like a 12 by 8. I mean, it's not a small clue in this. Expand on that a bit, if you will. Right there is showing exactly where the reddened tissue is and is subcutaneous under the skin. Now, as we all know, in an autopsy, the skin is pulled away from the body to look at the tissue underneath the skin. That's where the second medical examiner doctor found it. Many people are arguing it was a blow to the back of the head. Many people argue he fell, hit his head on the boat and went over. Well, if that happened, didn't anybody see him? So it's going to boil down to witness testimony and what that neck truly reveals. Again, why did the first medical examiner keep that part of the body? It was not sent to the second autopsy. That raises my antenna. There's a lot of hate going on around this case. It's very hard to understand. Again, it could be accidental. It may not be. and we can't stop the investigation until we know. This young man was 18. You know how old my twins are? 18. And I would be lying on the front of the courthouse steps, screaming for an answer till I got one. These victims wait for justice. Nolan Wells is still waiting. The least we can do is make sure his story reaches as far as it deserves. Subscribe. Not for us, for him. July 4th, 2026 was no different. Multiple groups left Ocean Springs that morning heading for the island. Warren Hudson, who would later identify himself publicly as Nolan's best friend, confirmed in a podcast interview that a large number of people made the trip out that day across several different boats. It was not one tight group. It was a loose network of people who knew each other, spread across the water on a holiday. The boat Nolan was on departed a private dock at 9:56 a.m. That departure time is not an estimate. It comes directly from GPS tracking data released by the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, the state agency responsible for monitoring vessel movement on Mississippi waters. According to that same data, the boat arrived at the western tip of Horn Island at 11:14 a.m. That is a verified time-stamped record of where the vessel was and when. On board with Nolan that morning were Bart Edmondson Jr., age 21, the oldest person in the group. Also present were Javon Williams and Treston Shepard, both friends from the Ocean Springs area. A woman named Laney was initially reported as part of the group that day. When investigators later contacted her, she denied being on Horn Island at all, telling them she was at a different location with a different group of people on July 4th. The group spent several hours on the island. At some point during that time, witnesses who were later interviewed by search teams described Nolan as having consumed a significant amount of alcohol. How significant and at what point during the day the toxicology results will need to answer. What is confirmed is that Nolan was there alive on the island as late as 3 p.m. That is where the account starts to fracture. If this case stayed with you, if any part of this story hit the way it hit us, then you already know what you need to do next. Subscribe. Because Nolan Wells deserves to be remembered, and we can't do that without you. The last time anyone confirmed seeing Nolan Wells alive was around 3 p.m. on Horn Island. That detail comes directly from the Jackson County Sheriff's Department. He was in blue swim trunks and sunglasses. That is the physical description they released publicly when they later appealed for witnesses to come forward. It is also the last concrete verified image of him that exists before everything else becomes contested. A video surfaced in the days following his disappearance that showed activity on the island during the group's time there. Attorney Ben Crump, representing the Wells-Wansley family, initially told reporters the footage captured Nolan's voice. He stated that Nolan could be heard in the video demanding his phone back and quoted him as saying words to the effect of, "Give me my phone, what are you doing?" Crump presented this as evidence of a confrontation involving Nolan and the people around him. Treston Shepard, who identified himself as a close friend who was on Horn Island that day, disputed that account directly. In an interview with Rolling Stone, Shepard said the voice heard in the video was his own, coming from a separate argument that had nothing to do with Nolan. He said Nolan was nearby in the water, but was not visible in the frame and was not the person speaking. Javon Williams, another friend from the group, separately told TMZ that he also did not believe the voice in the video belonged to Nolan. Crump later acknowledged publicly that his legal team would be more careful going forward about presenting unverified witness accounts as established fact. That acknowledgement did not resolve the dispute. The video remains contested, and what it actually shows or does not show has not been settled by any official finding. There is one more account from that afternoon that raises its own questions. A woman named Katie was on the island that day. Nolan's mother, Christine Wells Wansley, spoke to her afterward. Katie told Christine she had seen Nolan, but only briefly and in passing, not in any sustained interaction. Warren Hudson's version of what Katie observed was different from what Katie told the family directly. That discrepancy was noted but never publicly explained. You've come this far with us. Don't stop now. Subscribe. Be part of this investigation, because no case stays buried forever, and the next truth might be closer than you think. By mid-afternoon, the group was preparing to leave. The boat needed to get back to the mainland. That process was already underway, and Nolan was not moving toward it. At 4:31 p.m., the GPS data from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources recorded the boat leaving Horn Island. That timestamp is not in dispute. What happened in the minutes before that departure and in the hours that followed is where this case gets complicated. A video emerged showing the boat at the moment it was preparing to leave the island. Alexis Tereshchuk, investigative reporter for Crime Stories, reviewed the footage and confirmed a specific detail that matters to the timeline. This video was not shot somewhere out on open water. It was filmed right there at Horn Island as the boat was in the process of departing. 7 people are visible on board. Nolan Wells is not among them. That count of 7 lines up directly with what the caller would later tell the Coast Guard dispatcher when asked how many people were on the boat. 7, not 8. Warren Hudson said publicly that the group had been calling out to Nolan, telling him to get on the boat before they left. His account frames Nolan's absence as a choice. The GPS record does not speak to intent. It only confirms the result. The boat left at 4:31 and Nolan was not on it. What the GPS data captured next is where the questions start stacking up. The boat did not travel straight home. After leaving Horn Island, it was towed approximately 3 miles before the tow ended, and the vessel continued under its own power. It arrived at a private dock on El Camino Real Road in Gulf Hills, Mississippi, a residential area sitting just above Ocean Springs. At 5:44 p.m., investigators and online researchers noted that location as potentially significant, given that Nolan's phone was later retrieved from a house in that general area on the night he went missing. The boat did not stay at that dock. At 5:52 p.m., it traveled to Fort Bayou. At 6:06 p.m., it returned to the original dock. From there, it made a second trip back to Fort Bayou before eventually being brought to a boat launch, loaded onto a trailer, and driven away by vehicle. Every subscription is a promise that we will keep digging, that we will not let these cases go cold again. And I need you to make that promise right now. Walk through that sequence and one detail stands out immediately. The boat arrived at the dock at 5:44 p.m. It was not removed from the water and loaded onto a trailer until over an hour and 13 minutes later. This is a boat whose operator had called in a sinking emergency just hours before. The instinct when a vessel has taken on water is to get it out of the water as quickly as possible. Leaving it sitting in the water for over an hour after multiple additional trips does not fit that logic. Dave Mack, a contributor on the Nancy Grace broadcast, put the question plainly. If the boat was not actually sinking, why was the sea tow call made at all? What was the real reason for that distress call? That question takes us directly to the call itself. Around 4 p.m. on July 4th, roughly 30 minutes before the GPS recorded the boat leaving Horn Island, someone on board placed a call to Sea Tow. Sea Tow is a private marine assistance company, the water equivalent of a roadside towing service. The dispatcher who answered was a woman named Vicky. The caller identified himself as Bart. He told Vicky they were at the west tip of Horn Island, that their bilge pump had stopped working, and that the boat was going down. He told her they had a Sea Tow membership and asked to be towed back either to Ocean Springs Harbor or Fort Bayou launch. The request was clear. The urgency in his voice was clear. This was a distress call. Vicky asked him how far the water was coming up. She asked for a description. Ankles. The caller struggled to answer. He said it was coming up, that they were just thinking that they were going down now. The responses were fragmented and difficult to follow. At one point in the call, there was silence on the line where a direct answer should have been. A separate version of this distress call, the version placed to the Coast Guard, was obtained by NBC News. In that recording, the dispatcher asked directly whether everyone on board was in good health. The caller said, "Yes, everybody is all right." The dispatcher then asked whether everyone was accounted for. The answer was yes. The only way stories like this continue to be told is if people like you choose to care. And if you're still watching, I know you care, but caring isn't enough. Caring has to mean something. Caring has to lead to action. Subscribed. That exchange is worth sitting with for a moment. At 4 p.m., the caller confirmed to the Coast Guard that every person on the boat was present and fine. At 4:31 p.m., the GPS shows the boat leaving Horn Island with 7 people on board. Nolan Wells was not one of them. Either the caller was accounting for a group that did not include Nolan at the time of the call, or the account given to the Coast Guard was not accurate. Neither explanation closes the question cleanly. Here is what happened next with the Sea Tow call. After Vicky took the distress report, Sea Tow contacted a local boat captain in the area and asked him to respond. That captain called back within minutes. He told the dispatcher he had just spoken with the grandfather of the boat operator, a man named Jerry Atkinson, who told him the situation had been handled and that the boat no longer needed emergency assistance. The call was cancelled. The entire sequence from distress call to cancellation took roughly 10 minutes. Dave Mack laid out the core problem with that sequence on the Nancy Grace broadcast. Someone on the water called Sea Tow in a state of apparent panic, saying the vessel was actively sinking in 31 feet of water. Within 10 minutes, a man on land, not on the boat, not at the island, called in to say everything was fine and help was no longer needed. The people on that boat by all accounts were not aware that cancellation had happened, or that the grandfather had made that call. Jerry Atkinson later cooperated with investigators, allowing authorities to search his boat and review his GPS records as part of the case. The caller on that sea tow recording was Bart Edmondson, Jr. He was 21 years old at the time, from Ocean Springs, Mississippi. As the only legal adult in the group, he was the person who carried responsibility for what happened on that boat under Mississippi law. He had been an all-star kicker and punter at Ocean Springs High School and was signed to the Southern Miss football program at the time of this trip. Football ran in his family. His father, Dr. Bart Edmondson, had played football at the University of Florida before going into medicine. Dr. Edmondson works as a pain management physician at Memorial Health System in the Gulf Coast region. That detail drew attention because Christine Wells Wansley, a nurse practitioner connected to the Wells family, also works within that same hospital system. The Nancy Grace broadcast flagged that shared employer as a notable connection worth scrutiny. The transcript from that same broadcast also raised an allegation characterized explicitly as alleged that certain substances present among the group that day may have come through the father. That claim has not been confirmed by investigators in any public statement. What has been confirmed is that Bart Edmondson Jr. voluntarily turned over his boat, his GPS records, and his cell phone data to investigators. His attorney stated publicly that he cooperated fully with every request made of him. You stayed until the end. You heard his name. You heard his mother's pain. Now do the only thing that makes sense. Subscribe, because Nolan Wells deserves to be remembered, and we can't do that without you. The call to Cito raised more questions than it answered, and buried inside the audio of that call was something that would pull this case into an entirely different direction. If you are not already subscribed to this channel, right now is the moment to do it. What comes next in this case? The forensic audio, the phone evidence, the autopsy findings. This channel covers every layer as it develops. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you are here when the next update drops. Now, back to that recording. The Cito call did not just raise questions about the distress itself. It raised questions about what was happening in the background while that call was being made. When the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources released the audio publicly, people did not just listen to the conversation between the caller and Vicky, the dispatcher. They listened around it. Underneath the main exchange, beneath the hold music that played before Vicky picked up, and beneath the fragmented responses about the bilge pump in the sinking boat, there were other sounds, other voices. And what those voices were saying became one of the most debated questions in the entire case. Nancy Grace played the audio on air for her panel and stated that she could make out specific phrases in the background. She said she heard what sounded like a male voice telling someone to wake up. She said she could make out the phrase, "Oh my God," and she said she believed she could hear someone saying, "Don't die." She was direct about the stakes of that claim. If those words were real and verifiable, they would change the direction of the investigation entirely. To assess that possibility, the broadcast brought in Todd Shipley, a digital audio expert. Shipley explained what forensic audio enhancement actually involves. It is not simply turning up the volume. The process requires isolating individual audio streams within the recording, adjusting gain levels to bring quieter sounds forward, filtering out static and ambient noise, and separating the foreground conversation from whatever is happening in the background behind it. Once those layers are pulled apart, analysts can attempt to identify what individual voices are saying and potentially who those voices belong to. These stories wait for someone to tell them. The least we can do is make sure they reach as far as they deserve. Subscribe, not for us, for them. For every young person who never got to tell their own story. Shipley made one observation that shifted the conversation. He said the released recording did not appear to be complete. In a call of that nature with a dispatcher taking a distress report, there should be more conversation present than what the released version contained. He said that without the full unedited original audio, a proper and defensible forensic analysis could not be conducted. The question of what the background voices said could not be answered from an incomplete file. Online, the public was not waiting for expert analysis. A social media user identified as Anelka posted a detailed breakdown, claiming that at the very beginning of the recording, before Vicky answers the call, a female voice can be heard asking, "Is he dead?" She wrote that this is followed by someone calling out Nolan's name, and then the phrase, "Oh my God," before the line connects to the dispatcher. An internet personality identified as Secret Service reviewed the same section and said he also believed there was more happening in the background than the surface call suggested, adding that the caller himself sounded impaired. Robert Freed, a digital forensics expert retained independently and interviewed by News Nation, reached a different conclusion. After comparing the enhanced versions of the audio circulating online against the original recording, Fried said he could not corroborate the specific claims being made. He could not confirm the "is he dead" interpretation or the other phrases being identified by online analysts. That is where the audio evidence stands as of the time of this recording. The background voice claims are unverified. They have not been confirmed by any official forensic body. They have not been ruled out either, and the full unedited recording has not been released to the public or subjected to published official forensic analysis. What those voices were saying, if they were saying anything at all, remains an open question in this case. Every subscription is a promise that we will keep digging, that we will not let these cases go cold again, and I need you to make that promise right now. At 11:07 p.m. on July 4th, Christine Wells Wansley received a phone call from one of Nolan's friends letting her know he had not come back. That was the moment the night shifted from a holiday into a missing persons situation. Christine immediately reached out to her friend Tashima, whose sons had been part of the group on the island that day. While Christine checked Nolan's location through Life 360, Tashima pulled up his Snapchat location. The two apps showed his device in different places. Both locations were on land. Neither matched where Nolan was supposed to be. That discrepancy was the first concrete indication that something was wrong beyond him simply being late. The phone itself became the next problem. Tashima went to the house where the device appeared to be located and retrieved it. It was not handed over willingly. The phone came back to the family only after Christine and Tashima pressed the group for it. Warren Hudson addressed this directly in a multi-part interview on the Officer Tatum show. He said the phone had been taken off the boat by someone in the group and placed in a truck belonging to a friend named Wyatt. He said no one had access to Nolan's password, that nobody went into the device, that there was nothing on it worth hiding, and that it was handed back to the family as soon as they came to get it. His account was consistent across the interviews he gave. The family's experience of retrieving that phone told a different story about how cooperative that handover actually was. When Christine went through the phone, what she found, or more precisely, what she did not find, deepened her concern immediately. Nolan had 2 Snapchat accounts. Both were effectively empty. She told Good Morning America that this was not a case of content expiring. Snapchat retains photos and videos for up to 24 hours. It had not been 24 hours since the trip. There was simply nothing there. No photos from the boat, no videos from the island, no record of a holiday that Nolan, by every account from people who knew him, would normally have documented. The world looked away from cases like this for too long. Don't look away now. Subscribe. Be a witness. Because witnesses are what the dead deserve. He was known among family and friends for capturing moments at social gatherings. The absence of any content from one of the biggest days of the summer was not something Christine was willing to dismiss as coincidence. The explanation that had been circulating publicly was that Nolan had not posted anything because there was no cell reception on the water near Horn Island. Alexis Tereshchuk, the investigative reporter covering this case for Crime Stories, took that explanation apart methodically on the Nancy Grace broadcast. She documented how the story shifted over time. It started as no reception. Then it became that nobody brought their phones to the island because they had to wade through water to get ashore. Then the saltwater argument was raised as though saltwater posed a unique threat that freshwater would not. Each version collapsed when the next piece of evidence arrived. Videos from Horn Island surfaced, showing members of the group with their phones, and the sea tow call itself, placed from the water at those same coordinates, demonstrated clear and functional cell reception. The caller spoke to Vicky, the dispatcher, without any signal issues. If reception was strong enough for a distress call, it was strong enough for a Snapchat. Digital forensic analyst Heather Barnhart appeared on the Nancy Grace broadcast to explain what a proper forensic extraction of Nolan's phone would reveal. She said the process captures everything. Soft deletes, where content sits in a recoverable state, similar to a trash folder. Hard deletes, where content has been permanently removed. Timestamps on every action, showing exactly when something was deleted and in what sequence. She said there is a log that tracks all of that activity and that it is recoverable through forensic tools, regardless of whether the phone was wiped afterward. That forensic extraction is now part of an active legal process. Attorney Gary Bufkin of Carroll Bufkin plc, working on behalf of the estate administered by Christine Wells Wansley, filed subpoenas against 6 platforms: Snapchat, WhatsApp, TikTok, Meta Platforms, Life 360, and additional services. The subpoenas request subscriber records, current and former usernames, email addresses, IP addresses tied to account creation and access, login histories, password reset records, two-factor authentication activity logs, and any communications connected to Nolan's accounts. Ben Crump announced that both the family's legal team and the Jackson County Prosecutor's Office agreed to conduct a joint forensic inspection of the phone, with both sides reviewing the extraction results simultaneously. Those results have not been released. When they are, this channel will be the first place that information gets broken down for this audience. Subscribe right now and turn on notifications. The grand jury is waiting on this investigation. The forensic phone results are coming. You need to be here when that happens. You stayed until the end. You heard his name. You heard his mother's pain. Now do the only thing that makes sense. Subscribe, because Nolan Wells deserves to be remembered, and we can't do that without you. On the morning of July 6th, 2026, at approximately 8:40 a.m., a United States park ranger discovered a body in the water near the northwestern tip of Horn Island. The search that had been underway since the night of July 4th was over. Nolan Wells had been found 2 days after he was last seen alive on that same island. Jackson County Coroner Bruce Lind confirmed the identification through dental records. He told CBS News there were no immediate signs of physical injury visible on the body. That detail, no visible injury, became the foundation for the initial public position from local law enforcement that this appeared to be an accidental drowning with no foul play suspected. Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter had already stated publicly that from what investigators understood, Nolan had chosen to remain on the island when his friends left. The coroner's early findings appeared on the surface to support that framing. Donlan's family did not accept it. The official autopsy was conducted by the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office on July 7th, the day after the body was recovered. Those results have not been made public. They remain sealed and will be presented to a grand jury as part of the completed investigation. Whatever the state examination found, the public and the family are still waiting to know. Christine Wells Wansley and Elmore Wansley moved quickly. They transported Nolan's body to Washington, D.C. for an independent autopsy, retaining forensic pathologist Dr. Roger Mitchell to conduct the examination. The results were announced by attorney Ben Crump on July 22, 2026 at the NAACP National Convention in Chicago. Dr. Mitchell's preliminary report concluded that the cause and manner of Nolan's death are undetermined, pending further investigation. He stated that foul play could not be ruled out. The independent examination also found no apparent lacerations, fractures, or deep tissue injuries on the body, which was consistent with what Coroner Lind had reported from the initial recovery. Every subscription is a promise that we will keep digging, that we will not let these cases go cold again, and I need you to make that promise right now. The independent autopsy came with documented limitations. Dr. Mitchell's report acknowledged the constraints involved in conducting an examination at that stage after the original autopsy had already been performed and with the state's toxicology testing still pending. Forensic pathologists who reviewed the independent findings and subsequent media coverage noted that the state autopsy, combined with the full toxicology panel, would carry more evidentiary weight than what an independent examination could establish on its own. The independent results answered one narrow question. They could not confirm accidental drowning as the cause. They could not, however, identify what the actual cause was. Toxicology is where significant answers may still be waiting. Witnesses on Horn Island, who were later interviewed by search teams, described Nolan as having consumed a heavy amount of alcohol during the hours the group spent on the island. How much and what his condition was at the time he entered the water are questions that a full toxicology panel is designed to answer. Those results have not been released and remain part of the sealed official investigation. Elmore Wansley raised a question in interviews that investigators have not addressed publicly. Nolan went missing on July 4th. The island where he was last seen is the same island where his body was eventually found. A search involving the U.S. Coast Guard, the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, and the National Park Service was actively underway. His body did not surface until the morning of July 6th, 2 full days after he disappeared. Elmore said that gap does not add up to him and remains one of the central concerns he has about the account his family has been given. No official explanation for that 2-day gap has been provided. There is one fact about the group on Horn Island that day that has shaped how this case has been discussed nationally from the moment it became public. Nolan Wells was the only black person in that group. Everyone else on that boat was white. That is a documented, confirmed detail. And in Mississippi, a state with a deeply complicated racial history, it did not go unnoticed. The only way stories like this continue to be told is if people like you choose to care And if you're still watching, I know you care. But caring isn't enough. Caring has to mean something. Caring has to lead to action. Subscribe. The family retained Ben Crump shortly after Nolan's body was found. Crump is not a local attorney brought in for a regional case. He is one of the most recognized civil rights lawyers in the country, the attorney who represented the families of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor, among others. His entry into this case sent a clear and immediate signal about where the Wells-Wansley family stood on the accidental drowning conclusion. They were not accepting it, and they were not going to navigate the legal system quietly. Attorney Liza Park was named as part of the family's legal team alongside Crump. Attorney Eric Hertz was brought in to lead the independent investigation on the family's side, coordinating the forensic work separate from what law enforcement was conducting. The response from the broader public was significant. Actor and filmmaker Tyler Perry covered the expenses for Nolan's funeral service, which was held on July 21, 2026 at Centerpoint Church in Ocean Springs. At the service, Crump stood before the congregation and the cameras and urged anyone who had taken photos or videos on Horn Island on July 4th to come forward. He announced a reward of $100,000 for information about the circumstances surrounding Nolan's death. The ask was direct. If you were there and you saw something, the family needed to hear from you. The following day, July 22nd, Crump appeared at the NAACP National Convention in Chicago alongside NAACP President Derek Johnson and the Wells-Wansley family to announce the results of the independent autopsy. That venue was not a coincidence. It placed Nolan's case within a national civil rights framework and in front of an audience that understood exactly what it meant for a young black man to die under unclear circumstances in Mississippi while surrounded by white peers with local law enforcement moving quickly toward an accidental conclusion. Prior to the convention, Crump and the family met with Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McGrath. Following that meeting, it was confirmed that once the investigation is complete, the findings will be presented to a grand jury, which will determine whether criminal charges are warranted. That confirmation was one of the more concrete procedural developments in the case. You stayed until the end. You heard his name. You heard his mother's pain. Now do the only thing that makes sense. Subscribe, because Nolan Wells deserves to be remembered, and we can't do that without you. Warren Hudson did not attend Nolan's funeral. He said publicly that his family had received a significant volume of death threats after he began speaking about the case, and that he did not want his presence to pull attention away from Nolan. The threats were not isolated. The FBI opened a formal investigation into threats made against witnesses and officials connected to the Nolan Wells case. Mississippi Attorney General Lynn Fitch issued a public statement warning that anyone who attempted to threaten or intimidate investigators, prosecutors, or witnesses in this case could face criminal consequences. Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves made public comments about the case. Crump responded to those comments publicly, though the two sides characterized the exchange differently, and neither statement resolved the underlying tension about how the investigation was being handled at the state level. Treston Shepard, who had already disputed the island video account in Rolling Stone, went further in the same interview. He said he felt the case was being framed around race in a way that was inaccurate and harmful to everyone involved. He said the friends in the group supported each other and that the racial narrative being pushed did not reflect the reality of their relationships. His perspective stands as part of the documented record, one voice among several that have shaped public understanding of this case. Bart Edmondson Jr., through his legal team, has indicated plans to pursue civil action against individuals who made specific accusations against him online. That legal posture sits alongside his documented cooperation with investigators, a combination that his attorney has presented as evidence that he has nothing to conceal. Laney, the woman initially placed in the group by early reports, told investigators she was not on Horn Island on July 4th. She said she was at a separate location with different people entirely. That account has not been publicly verified or contradicted by any official finding. As of this recording, no charges have been filed in connection with the death of Nolan Wells. The investigation is active. That distinction matters because active does not mean moving fast, and the family has made clear they are watching the pace of this process as closely as they are watching the findings. Every subscription is a promise that we will keep digging, that we will not let these cases go cold again, and I need you to make that promise right now. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office remains the primary law enforcement body gathering evidence. When their investigation reaches completion, the full file goes to District Attorney Angel Myers McGrath's office. From there it moves to a grand jury which will review the evidence and determine whether probable cause exists to pursue criminal charges against anyone. That grand jury process has been confirmed publicly by Mac Rath. It has not been given a timeline. The official autopsy conducted by the Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office on July 7th remains sealed. The toxicology results that accompany it have not been released. Those two documents together represent the most consequential pieces of forensic evidence in this entire case. The state's findings on cause of death, combined with a full toxicology panel that will speak to Nolan's physical condition when he entered the water, are what the grand jury will be weighing alongside everything else investigators have gathered. Until those results are made public, the forensic picture of what happened to Nolan Wells remains officially incomplete. The social media subpoenas filed by attorney Gary Bufkin on behalf of the family's estate are active as of this writing. Snapchat, WhatsApp, TikTok, Meta platforms, Life 360, and the additional platforms named in those filings have been served. The records being sought, covering account activity, login histories, IP addresses, and communication logs connected to Nolan's accounts, have not yet been produced or reviewed publicly. The joint forensic inspection of Nolan's phone, agreed to by both the family's legal team and the Jackson County Prosecutor's Office, is part of the same ongoing process. Both sides reviewing that extraction simultaneously was presented as a transparency measure. The results of that inspection have not been announced. Warren Hudson has not been charged with any crime. He has given multiple public interviews across several platforms, maintained consistent denials about the phone, and identified himself throughout as someone who cooperated with the process and lost a friend on July 4th. He remains a private individual navigating a case that has placed him at the center of significant public scrutiny and documented threats against his safety. Bart Edmondson Jr. has not been charged with any crime. He cooperated voluntarily with investigators, surrendering his boat, GPS records, and cell phone data without being compelled to do so. His legal team has indicated civil action is being prepared against individuals who made specific accusations against him online in the months following Nolan's death. That legal posture is distinct from the criminal investigation and does not affect its trajectory.
Laney's denial of being on Horn Island that day remains unresolved in the public record.
Investigators contacted her. She said she was elsewhere. No official statement has confirmed or contradicted that account beyond what was reported. These stories wait for someone to tell them. The least we can do is make sure they reach as far as they deserve. Subscribe. Not for us, for them. For every young person who never got to tell their own story. There is one document that cuts through a significant amount of the uncertainty about what happened after 4:31 p.m. ABC News obtained a document from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources showing what search teams were told when they went out looking for Nolan in the hours after he was reported missing. That document confirmed that witnesses on Horn Island gave descriptions of Nolan to searchers. People saw him after the main group left. They described his condition. They were on that island with him during the window that matters most to this investigation. Alexis Tereshchuk, the investigative reporter who has tracked this case from the beginning, identified the question that sits at the center of everything that remains unresolved. Who was on Horn Island with Nolan Wells after 4:31 p.m.?